Hey, greetings everybody. This is Sweet Beats with Sweet Beats Tech Stop, and we're taking a close look at a Tascam 688 Midistudio and focusing on the mixing section and in particular the scene display and assign panel that's here. So anyway, I've got this thing here on the bench. Like most things that end up in my shop, this was something that followed me home, needed repairs, and I've always been curious about 688. So picked this up for a fairly good price. It needed some repairs, including a new capstan belt and some other minor repairs, but it's in good shape. It's complete. Everything's working. And so this video is probably going to end up being like most of mine where because they're unscripted, I ramble on and on and on. So just bear with me. My goal here is to talk you through the mixing section and talk you through the scene display panel, because that seems to be something that is offers a certain amount of confusion for folks, even warding people away from the 688. And a lot of this is going to apply to the 644 as well, because it uses a very similar scene display interface for input sourcing and channel assignment. So we'll talk through that. But anyway, it's been a lot of fun having this thing in the shop. It really is a beast. The pictures and the video probably just don't do the size justice. This is a big cassette multi-tracker, and it's heavy. And the 688 is cool because it's got the meter bridge, which is nice, and lots of input-output options. And the mixing section is really a pretty powerful mixer. So I had some fun the other night when I was testing getting this thing working and just kind of walking through the mixer functions and then just playing around and getting familiar with how this thing over here works. And I thought in my mind, it might be an interesting exercise and kind of help to explain and take some of the mystery out of the scene display panel. If we take its functions and put them over here if they were on hardware switches. And so that might help kind of relate some of what it does to folks that are familiar with more traditional analog mixing console controls. So let's just first walk through the controls that are here. You've got a mic trim knob, obviously that correlates with the mic inputs, but these can also be balanced line inputs, and those are another source option for that jack. So you've got your mic trim knob. This trim knob only has to do with the mic amp. It does not correlate to the line inputs. Those are a fixed -10 dBV input. And then we also have unbalanced insert points on each of these 10 inputs. So compared to any other Tascam Portastudio, this is the granddaddy of them all in terms of input-output. And I'll talk through the master section jack panel later. So we've got our mic trim knob. We have an overload LED. We have a nice little EQ section with high-low shelving and swept mids, semi-parametric, swept mid, fixed Q. And then we get to our aux buses. And at first glance, you might think, oh, there's just two auxes. Well, that's not that great. But they're really pretty flexible because, like a lot of other TIAC and Tascam mixing consoles over the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, this knob really controls two functions. We have post-fade send, aux1 send, or pre-fade. So you've got some flexibility there on whether it is like a send effect bus post-fade, or whether it is a pre-fade monitor or Q feed. So that's some nice flexibility. And then aux2 similarly can be post-fade, so like an effect aux bus, but then you sweep the other direction and it sources from the dual bus. For those of you that have a later generation, like late 80s, early 90s Tascam consoles, they use this dual bus a lot, and I've never had one of those consoles. This is my first experience with it. It's actually a pretty cool feature, and on the 688 it's got a lot of flexible features to it. So this is a stereo bus, well, mono input, stereo output, pan left and right, and we have a level knob and we have a pan control. This has a lot of source options. Again, we'll get into that as soon as we start talking more about the scene display and source and assign panel. So you get multiple places where this can get its source from, but it can output to lots of different places. One of those being you can pick it up in your aux bus right here, the post level dual output for this channel. So that's what aux2 does. It's either a post fade aux send or sources the dual bus. And then we've got a pan control for the input strip. So actually it goes to the fader first and then the pan control out to your groups. So you're thinking, okay, well, where's the assignment? How do we pick what the channel strip source is, and how do we pick where it goes to? Because remember, a mixing console, it is a device that takes multiple sources, often of different types, like for instance, mic level sources and line level sources, which are much stronger than mic level. So it takes sources of multiple types, brings them to a common operating level, and then allows you to combine and or split and send them out to different buses. And again, a bus, just like a school bus, is a vehicle for carrying multiple beings, and in this case, multiple signal sources. So we've got our input sources and we've got our output buses. So each strip has multiple sources and multiple buses that we can send it out to. The 6888 has quite a lot of buses, and just looking at the controls here on the strip, you wouldn't realize at first glance what it can do. So I thought, well, let's take the scene display and source and assign control panel. Let's take what's actually housed here in terms of our source selection and our output assignments, our bus assignments, and let's take them over here if we actually have switches for all of it. So this guy over here controls a source switch for the strip, whether it is sourcing the mic jack or the line jack or sourcing the tape track that numerically corresponds with the strip. So channel 1 would source tape track 1 to track 2, etc. Okay, because these are channels, and then we've got tape tracks, because yes, as you all know, the Tascam 688 is an 8-track cassette multi-track machine, and as an aside, has a whole raft of MIDI functionality, has a cool little auto locator on it. It does scrubbing. It's a really powerful tool for those of you that like to work with cassette and multi-track and also work with MIDI. So pretty monstrous. I don't do a lot of MIDI stuff, but this machine will chase lock to time code. It can also be the master in a sync relationship with another machine or with a DAW it has an onboard synchronizer on it. So pretty cool. All right, so back over here on the scene display and input source and assign panel, and I would have screened this differently. I would have labeled these differently, even with different colors or something, if I'd been in charge of it. This display has 3 different pages, okay? It has the input page. So when we click input, now we are looking at the main input for each of the channel strips 1 through 10, and whether it's mic, line, or tape, just like this switch over here, okay? So if we want channel 1 to source the line input, then we do channel 1 and line. Let's see. Oh, line 1. So that's how it works. First you select the type of input, and these are the assign functions for, in this column, the assign functions for the main input. And see, we have mic and line and tape, just like we have over here, mic, line, tape, just like if we had a switch over here, mic, line, tape for 1. But then you'd have to cram these switches in to each one of these. So again, this may take some getting used to, but what it does, this control surface for the mixer would take up so much more real estate if you didn't do it in this way. The other thing that's nice about this that some folks may not think about is that, yeah, it's maybe not as tactile as having switches, but all of your switching is now handled by logic circuitry, which makes your switching typically silent, and it lasts longer too. If you had mechanical switches for all this stuff, how many of you have dealt with older mixers where you've got to exercise the switches and, you know, squirt contact cleaner in them, and, you know, they get old and futzy and you've got to mess with it if it's been sitting for a day or two. You don't have to deal with that when you have electronic switching. The switching is silent and you don't have mechanical contacts that get oxidized or corroded or soiled and fail. So that's a plus for this. So when I going back to this here, when I was saying earlier, I would have labeled these a little differently. It's way confusing because we've got input. I would make this a different color and then have their corresponding labels be a different color, because these switches have multiple functions depending on what page you're on. Okay, so when you're on the input page, we want to look at this button controls the mic source assignment, this button controls the line source assignment, and this button controls the tape source assignment. And that's for the main input, like this switch over here that controls your source. This column, when you're on the input page, has to do with the source of the dual bus for that channel. Remember earlier when I was talking about this has a lot of different options from where it gets its signal from, and then it has lots of options for where the signal goes to. So the dual bus can also source the mic, the line jack, or the tape track, corresponding tape track for the associated channel. It also can pick up a post-fade feed. So, for instance, if we wanted channel 1 to source the mic jack, so if we wanted this to be on mic, we would hit mic. Now it's blinking. It says, okay, tell me what you want to put here. And then these are our 10 channels. So then we'll do 1. I want channel 1 to be on the mic. But I want the dual bus to source the tape track for tape track 1. So then we do tape, and now this one is saying, okay, what do you want to put here? And we'll put 1 there. The other powerful thing is that there are a lot of predefined scenes. So this is a scene, all of these settings, and I know a lot of you are familiar with scene displays and scene memory, and especially for those of you that have worked with DAWs. But for those of you that aren't, this is a scene. These settings, all of what we have here, and we could put these things all over the place wherever we need to for our project. We can then save that into the memory so that it's easy to quickly recall that. It makes it super quick to be able to jump between different phases of your project, because when you're doing initial tracking, your channels are going to source your mic or line sources, and those are going to your tape tracks. But then when you want to mix down, or you want to overdub, you're going to change up what is sourcing what. Your dual bus might be sourcing your tape tracks for Q feeds or whatever, but you'll be able to set that up in here depending on your workflow and quickly skip between those pages. So that's another powerful feature of it. Okay, so we've covered the input page. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. We have the main input assignment, mic, line, or tape, which is just like a switch that you'd go flip over to mic or center for line or over to the right for tape, the source of the channel strip. But then the dual bus has like a 4-position switch: mic, line, the tape track, or the post fade send. So that is whatever input source you have selected here, and it goes through your channel strip, and then after the fader, that would be the source at the level knob here. Okay, so that's already a couple of big switches, or if there might be multiple push switches we would have to do for that if we were going to cram that in there. So that's what the input page does. Now let's look at the main assignment. So we have the main input and dual input. Now we're going to look at the where do the channels go. And so when you're on the main assign page, now we're looking at the group labeling. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, Group 4, Group 5, Group 6, Group 7, Group 8. You can see what I'm talking about. It would have been helpful if they had used different colors or something. But once you get used to doing this, you probably won't even think about it. So what I have set up right now for the assign, on your left, we have our output group buses, which can be accessed here on our group output jacks, post our group faders. And there's 8 groups, but you only see 4 faders. That's because each fader has 2 buses ganged on it. So this controls group 1, 2, group 3, 4, group 5, 6, group 7, 8. Those groups also are what go to our tape tracks. Group 1 goes to track 1, group 2 goes to track 2, etc. So, okay, that's where our group buses take your signals. And what I have set up here is that channel 1 is assigned to group 1, channel 2 is assigned to group 2, and so on and so forth. It's just kind of a standard straight ahead. If I had 8 mics hooked up to channels 1 through 8, and I wanted each of those to go to a separate tape track, channel 1 going to track 1, channel 2 going to track 2, etc. And then maybe I've got, a couple of line sources, a stereo line source over here on channels 9 and 10, and I'm sending that over to group 1 and 2 also for additional overdubs or something. But you can, if you want, you could say, okay, on group 1 and 2 and 3, 4, oh, whoops, sorry. So you can select multiple groups. So now look, all 8 groups are blinking. They're saying, okay, what do you want to assign to me? And then if I hit 1, you can send individual channels to more than one group, or you can send them to only one group. You can send them nowhere. So lots of options there. And again, once you get familiar with this and can apply your workflow to it, you can save these scenes in the memory and quickly recall them. So what does this look like on a standard mixer though, right? Usually you've got your group assigned switches. So that would mean what this is controlling right here, this like channel 1 assigned to groups 1 through 8, we would need 8 assigned switches for these program groups. You would have those for each channel. They'd have to cram those in there. But that's what these would be like. Oh, look, we also have a mute control. That's hiding down here, this last button. The mute function is available in any one of these pages, but you activate it by hitting mute, and now channel mute is blinking, and we can hit the channel control for any one of our 10 channels. Now all 10 channels are muted, and then, you know, we can control which ones we have muted or not muted. So maybe in some cases a bit more cumbersome than just having a mute switch right here that you can hit. I will give you that, but it's there. We do have that functionality on the 688. And then next we have this effect assign page. So the 688 has 4 mono effects returns, which can also be 2 stereo effects returns if you just have a connector plugged into 1 or 3. It automatically centers it in the stereo field for you, so that's a nice feature. But you can have 4 mono sources or 2 stereo sources, and so you connect those there, your outputs of your effect devices, and then those come here to these effect return level controls. Well, where do these go? There's no assigned switches. There's no way, what, do these just dump over to the main group 1-2 bus? Well, no. Each one of these, we're going to have to cram in 8 assigned switches. We need 8 switches for return 1, 8 switches for return 2, return 3, return 4. We need 32 switches crammed in here somewhere, or we can just have them over here. So you can see you've got channel 1, 2, 3, 4. That's in this page, on the assign effect page. That's for effect return 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they can be assigned to any or all of the 8 group buses. So we've got that going for us. Lastly, over here on the right, the dual bus, okay, we talked about the source of the dual bus can be the mic jack, the line jack, the tape track, or the post fade send of the main channel. But we can also output those to pairs of groups. So that means that each one of these dual sections on each channel would need to have 4 assigned switches for the group 1-2 bus, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 and 8. And of course you can select one or the other by using the pan control. So that's what this does over here. It links the dual bus for all of them. So this isn't a per channel. It would be like a master or a set of switches over here, like under the dual master, but it does give you additional ability to define where you want the output of this to go to. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility. And again, you can source that dual bus here as an additional send. We've got tons of options for Q feeds and monitoring. And in addition to that, there is a 8-channel Q bus for monitoring tape track playback. And then we have monitor control here for your master monitor. This level controls your monitor output jacks to your monitor speaker amp or active monitor speakers, as well as 2 headphone jacks that are down under here. Would be nice to have some separate control for some of those, but this is better than nothing. And we have a mono control to check your mono mix, and we can monitor the dual bus, aux1 or aux2, or the Q monitor bus, or group 1 and 2, which are kind of used like a main bus. If you want to think of that as like a stereo mix down, you would mix stuff down to the group 1, 2 bus. So those are some features of the mixing section on the 688 and our scene display and input assign and group assign control panel. Hope that is helpful to you, and again, much of this should apply to the 644 as well because it uses a similar interface. So hope this was helpful. Hope you enjoyed the unscripted rambling. If you like this, please like it. Subscribe to my channel. I put random stuff up every now and then, and I've even done special request things. Sometimes people will ask, well, how does this work? Or what do you do with this? Or what do you know about this unit? And if I happen to have one in the shop, I can walk through something like that and put up a video. So anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.